Welcome into a brand new edition of the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobacco-road-sports-radio.com. I am your host, Desmond Johnson, joined by my bi-weekly co-host from the North Carolina Sports Network, the infamous David Glenn, in the house on the eve of the ACC tournament kicking off in Charlotte later on today, the first round. Notre Dame taking on Pitt at 2 p.m., the 12 versus the 13th seed. Virginia Tech taking on Cal at 4:30 p.m., the 10 versus the 15, and then 11th seed Florida State taking on Syracuse in the nightcap at 7 p.m. All three of those games are on ACC Network. It's an all ACC sports buffet edition with David Glenn today. We'll get into everything you've been wanting to talk about in terms of college football, college basketball, Cooper Flag. The all ACC teams are out. We'll get into all that and more. Let's go ahead and roll the intro. It's the Desmond Johnson Show.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city need that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed whacked. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's 4th and inches, I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And welcome into the Desmond Johnson Show here live on a Tuesday, March the 11th, 2025. Desmond Johnson here in the house with you. David Glenn from North Carolina Sports Network in the house as he gets ready to take off to Charlotte to get ready to cover the ACC Men's Basketball Tournament 2025 edition. DG, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
I am doing great, Des. Happy March Madness to you. One of my favorite times of the year.
Yes. Besides Super Bowl week, I think the opening weekend of the NCAA basketball tournament and then this ACC tournament week, even though the ACC is watered down this year, I still expect some good basketball coming out of Charlotte. And I'm still in that party of the ACC tournament should always happen in the state of North Carolina. I don't care if it really should be in Greensboro every year, in my opinion. But, of course, we're in a different world now. Cal, SMU, Stanford are in the conference. I don't know if they would agree with having it in Greensboro every year going forward, but it's in Charlotte this year, and it'll come back around to North Carolina in the next couple of years. I wanted to do Sports Buffet with DG because there's a lot of ACC questions I had in my head, and of course, who better to ask about some of the state of the ACC than David Glenn himself. I wanted to go back to last week to start off, and the decision by the ACC and Florida State and Clemson to basically settle their ongoing lawsuits. There's 3 different lawsuits going on. And I've been listening to when you're on our show, of course, and then when you're on other shows where you explain kind of the legality of some of this stuff in terms of usually the case that gets to the end first, that becomes kind of the one that the other ones kind of follow. And it felt like the ACC was kind of worried that the one in Florida that had the judge that graduated from Florida State could potentially just lean their way, which would kind of create a domino effect with the whole thing. So the ACC kind of came to terms with them and gave them some items they wanted in terms of revenue sharing and things of that sort. The thing I wanted to talk to you about, though, I didn't want to go to the nuts and bolts of the legality of what they did, but the one part of it that stuck out to me was the year 2030, where the grant of rights with ESPN and all that stuff, that ends technically in 2036. But in 2030, the buyout becomes significantly less for teams to get out of the ACC. And most importantly, I think 2030 is the year that lines up when the other 2 conferences are going to have to re-up with ESPN. I think the SEC, or was it the Big Ten? One of the 2?
Yeah, SEC is a little bit later, but the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the college football playoff TV deals all right around 2030 come up for renegotiation.
So they wanted Clemson and Florida State wanted the ability to, if necessary, basically bolt and go to the Big Ten or wherever they needed to go with the shifting landscape of college football and college athletics in general. My question to you was, if I'm reading everything right, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm reading everything right and kind of looking at all this, the only way really the ACC can actually generate more money between now and 2030 would be to add more teams, because the more teams they add, ESPN has to continuously add more to the deal, which is what happened when they brought in Cal, SMU, and my mind's went blank. Right. So when they brought those 3 in, it added additional money. Plus, those schools agreed to give up TV revenue for a certain length of time. Do you feel when you're reading through this that there's a possibility of ACC expansion, that they might actually, I don't know, go try to raid the Big 12? The Mountain West is in flux right now. They're getting kind of scavenged by whatever's going to become with the Pac-12. Do you go to the Pac-12 and make an agreement with them? Because right now the ACC is at what's 18 teams right now. So to get to 24 wouldn't be very hard, and you're already coast to coast at this point anyway. Why not build a super 24 league ACC West, ACC East? That way you eliminate having Cal having to fly away back and forth across the country all the time. You get some of those West schools and you put it all underneath the ACC umbrella. You force ESPN to have to pay more, and you've created this thing where it's like the biggest conference there is in college athletics. Is that a possibility, or am I crazy, David Glenn, from watching all this stuff?
Well, you know the deal. The reason expansion usually happens is that there's a school out there that can add more to your bottom line than they would take away as one more mouth to feed, right? Like when the old Big 12 had 2 super heavyweights, and it was Texas and Oklahoma. And sure enough, the SEC gobbled those 2 up. The old Pac-12 had 4 schools that made a lot of money. It was Southern Cal, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. Sure enough, the very wealthy Big 10 gobbled up all 4 of them. What's happening now is that there are not as many schools left that would add value to the ACC or anybody else. That's why I would be skeptical about the ACC expanding. You never say never. And there's even, talks of whether the ACC and the Big East should have an alliance of some kind, if not realignment with basketball, just as to focus on that product of those 2 great hoops leagues. Well, I don't think the ACC is in expansion mode. I think that whole picture that you just painted there, Des, has a lot more to do with the idea. Look, the ACC now has this new revenue stream, revenue distribution concept because of the legal settlements. The ACC shared revenue basically equally for 70 years. And for the first time, this current year, they're sharing money based on the field and on the court success. It's a success initiative. So rather than pure revenue sharing, you get extra money if you make an NCAA tournament run or you go to the college football playoff. And now because of these lawsuits, they're sharing money differently based on TV eyeballs. So the idea is give Florida State, which has been the loudest critic, 5 years, the rest of the 2020s, let them get used to this new revenue sharing model where, Des, right now, everybody might get a check around $45 million. Because of these changes, if you're a more successful school with more TV eyeballs and your fellow ACC teams are still getting that $45 million baseline, you might be getting $58 million because they're not dividing it equally. Now, some other school in the ACC might drop from $45 million to $38 million because they're not on TV as much. They don't draw as many TV eyeballs. They're not winning as much on the field. Give Clemson and Florida State the rest of the 2020s, while it still is expensive to leave under those exit penalties. Give them 5 years to get used to this, because I know this. Clemson has said, look, it's not worth jumping to another league for a little more money if it's harder to get to the college football playoff in that other league.
Right. That's the thing I couldn't figure out. Why they wanted to leave. So you want to go to the Big Ten or SEC?
Model, close to what the SEC schools make, close to what the Big Ten make, but you still have a chance to dominate a league where, Clemson's won, what is it now, 9 of the last 10 almost ACC titles, something in that neighborhood. Well, that is a beautiful double whammy if you're the Clemson Tigers. And Florida State has been hard to pacify, but maybe the Seminoles like how the rest of the 2020s go as well. And then the world could change a lot. I mean, there could be super conferences that make the current system that we've all gotten used to irrelevant. A whole lot could change again, roughly 5 years from now. But I think one of the incentives for the ACC to settle those lawsuits is that the league believes that it's going to have stability for the remainder of the 2020s. And if at some point after that, Florida State or somebody else wants to leave or gets an offer they can't refuse, well, then the ACC believes it'll still have enough schools to chase success in such a way that maybe you upgrade their football and men's basketball product so that when 2036 gets near, whatever ACC schools are still around, maybe you're a more appealing partner to the ESPN folks, and they or somebody else can upgrade that TV deal that's been weighing you down for so long.
David Glenn joined us here from the North Carolina Sports Network, bi-weekly co-host here on Tuesdays with me on the Desmond Johnson Show. And I think I've heard it from you more times than anyone else in terms of no matter the perception of people, and John Swofford, the head of the ACC here, he could not have gotten the same amount of money that the SEC and Big Ten did. And it's because of what you were saying. There's just more eyeballs on the SEC and Big Ten football. Like there was nothing he could do to get the same amount of money that they were going to get. Because I've seen people go, oh, Swofford dropped the bag. He messed up. He did this. At the time when they did this, they were doing it to save the league. Like people kind of forget how the grant of rights even began. Because Maryland bolted in the middle of the night, and other schools, Florida State specifically, was very worried about the state of the league falling apart, and they made this so that the schools would stay. So it's kind of ironic that Florida State and Clemson would lead this charge now that the rug's been kind of yanked out from underneath them, to find a way out of a situation that they basically created to save their home. So we'll see what happens with that. I think a lot of folks wouldn't mind if Florida State left the league at this point anyway, but
I'm glad you brought that up, Des, because I'll just say this real quickly. I'm not saying there's no fair criticisms of former ACC Commissioner John Swofford. There are fair criticisms. However, I will say this as a blanket statement. Anybody out here in TV land, radio land, media land, who does not include in the conversation that the starting point for why the Big Ten and the SEC have soared past everybody else financially, the starting point is that their football TV product more consistently draws more millions of eyeballs than everybody else, and you can be the greatest negotiator in the world, and if you're in charge of either the Big 12 or the ACC, and they simply do not get consistently nearly as many millions of football TV eyeballs, they don't have as many cards in their hand while they're negotiating these TV deals. Yep. Again, there are other factors, but there's a whole bunch of just grifters and con artists and clueless people in the media who want to lay it all at John Swofford's feet when they don't even realize that the grassroots behind it all is simply how many people watch your football TV product. And those numbers are astronomical in the Big Ten and the SEC, and that translates directly to astronomical TV deals for those two leagues.
It's not hard to really kind of see what's happening here. Like it drives me nuts when I see people argue about it and they just kind of want to dump on John Swofford. I'm like, he kind of inherited this, and they didn't know this was going to happen 10 years later. Like they were trying to save the league. They weren't thinking really so much about money, like future monies when this occurred. So let's see what they do. I want to hop over, of course, the basketballs, the ACC tournament week starting today. Again, on the ACC network, you can catch the opening round of the ACC tournament starting at 2 p.m. today. The 12-seed Notre Dame taking on the 13-seed Pitt. 10-seed Virginia Tech takes on Cal at 4:30 p.m. And then the nightcap tonight, Florida State and Leonard Hamilton's final run through the ACC tournament taking on Syracuse at 7 p.m. Tomorrow, you've got a full 4-game slate. Georgia Tech taking on Virginia at noon on ESPN. Really kind of the traditional opening day of the ACC tournament, the way it's kind of structured. You've got the 5-seed North Carolina, who fell to 5 after losing to Duke on Saturday. They'll take on the winner of Notre Dame and Pitt. Stanford will take on the winner of Virginia Tech and Cal at 7 p.m. And SMU, who may be the Scooby-Doo villain of the ACC because they haven't played anyone. And they're the 6th seed. They haven't beaten anyone, I think, in the top 5 of the ACC this year. And they're the 6th seed. They're taking on Florida State or the Syracuse winner at 9:30 p.m. tomorrow. The top 4 seeds will start playing on Thursday, including top-ranked Duke. Speaking of the ACC, speaking of teams that are not there, would be your ACC reigning champion and Final Four participant from last year, NC State, who fired Kevin Keatts on Sunday after they fell to Miami on a last-second shot, 72-70. Kevin Keatts is no longer employed by NC State. I've seen the buyout. It was around about $8 million. What's next for NC State? Because they seem like they're in a flux here, not just with basketball, because their football program kind of went through it this past year too, just dealing with the complexities of NIL. Kevin Keatts echoed numbers of times this year that, you know, once they decide to put money into the men's basketball program, they can thrive here. It was almost like kind of like little stabs there, like we're not getting enough. We're not getting enough to be able to keep these kids here. What do you think's next for NC State? What should be the best way for them to go just on the college basketball side here, should they go in-house and find someone that played there before, coached there before? Should they go out-house? What should they do here at NC State and Raleigh? Because it's a big job.
In Kevin Keats's goodbye letter to the fan base, he had one more little tweak there where he said, essentially, this program will continue to rise and build on that success of the Final Four and ACC title of 2 years ago, as long as it gets the support necessary in today's environment.
I saw the
and he didn't feel like he got that. And a lot of ACC coaches feel like the league dropped the ball just in terms of competitiveness. If you and I, Des, made a list of starting players in the SEC right now that previously were from the ACC and they were just lured away by name, image, likeness money, there's a dozen guys now starting in the SEC.
Yeah.
That they just lured away from the ACC, proven players. And the reverse list, the number of ACC guys that were kind of pillaged from the SEC is a very short list. The best player might be like a Van Allen Lubin, who's a part-time starter for the Tar Heels that they got from Vanderbilt. So essentially the SEC pillaged and devoured the ACC in the transfer portal last year. And that's one of the reasons the SEC is at the top of the college basketball world right now. And the ACC is considered, the number 5 league. But specific to NC State, I really believe that Ryan Odom, son of Dave Odom, will end up in the Atlantic Coast Conference this year. Now, will it happen at UVA, where, remember, Dave Odom was a longtime assistant coach, and they love Coach Odom in Charlottesville to this day. Dave Odom is a huge advocate for his son, Ryan, who, remember, he was the coach at UMBC when the first ever 16 seed beat a 1 seed. Yeah. That was Ryan Odom's UMBC team. So he's had success there. Right. He's had success at Utah State, and now he's 2 years into a very successful run at VCU. I think the Virginia Cavaliers are very interested in Ryan Odom for their vacancy, and I think the Wolfpack is interested in Ryan Odom as well. And then there are others. Andy Kennedy of UAB, the head coach there, is a former Wolfpack player. Justin Gainey's a former Wolfpack point guard, is now one of the top assistants to Rick Barnes at Tennessee. And then the volatile but headline-grabbing candidate is Will Wade of McNeese State. He has an incredible track record for winning. I know a lot of Wolfpack fans who want to see him be the next guy, but he also put LSU on probation. He also was charged with 5 level 1 NCAA violations while the head coach of the Tigers, and got a show cause penalty and was out of college basketball.
That's why that name's familiar. Yeah.
The severity of those sanctions. Now, has the guy won? Heck yeah. He won at Chattanooga. He won at VCU. He won at LSU. And he's winning big at McNeese State as we speak. And he's a relatively young guy. Formerly on Tommy Amaker's staff at Harvard, formerly on Shaka Smart's staff back in his VCU days. So you can't argue with the guy's winning ways, Will Wade, but you also can't argue with his checkered past. I mean, he was paying players and paying the players' girlfriends to lie about paying players, and he was lying to the NCAA, and he got caught. Like, the cover-up was worse than the crime. He just kept lying to the NCAA and being dishonest with them during their investigation. So I know plenty of Wolfpack fans who don't care. He wins, right? And that's all that matters to them. Does the NC State administration feel that way? The athletic director, Boo Corrigan, who came from West Point, where integrity and doing things the right way. He was the AD at West Point for almost a decade. He's the guy. Boo Corrigan hired Jeff Monken, the guy who turned Army football around. Does Boo Corrigan and the outgoing NC State chancellor, do they green light a candidate like Will Wade, which would be popular to many fans? Again, not all, but many. Or does Virginia beat them to the punch on Ryan Odom? But those are just some of the names. Who knows? That stuff could take a turn any day, although some of the targets obviously are still coaching right now.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens at NC State, and especially if they decide to, they're going to have to. They want to compete in college football and basketball. They're going to have to do what everyone else is doing, which is basically pony up some money. And I'm glad you kind of went where you went there on it, because Myron Metcalf had just posted an article about 10 a.m. on ESPN.com about the ACC and how it's on track for its fewest bids in the NCAA tournament in 25 years. Right now, Joe Lunardi, Joey Buckets, he only has 3 ACC teams in the tournament, Duke, Louisville, and Clemson. It's going to take a run by somebody in the ACC tournament for a Wake Forest or a Carolina or SMU to even get into the tournament. The league in men's basketball has changed drastically over the past couple of years. And what you were saying about the money and these schools rating the ACC, according to Open Doors, which is here in Myron's article, the ACC's top 10 men's basketball players in NIL earnings in January 2024 made less than their peers in the Big East, Big 10, Big 12, and the SEC. In fact, the ACC's top 10 made less than half of what the Big 12's top 10 made at the same time. So that gives you an idea of how far the gap has been created with the ACC and NIL money for these players, and then exploded the next year. And now you see the SEC with 13 projected berths right now, and Texas might get in. They're on the bubble. They might get 14 teams into the NCAA tournament, DG. And that's because the SEC has been paying to invest in college basketball. Half of the 12 highest paid coaches in college basketball are in the SEC. 1/3 of the top 100 transfers in the transfer rankings picked SEC schools. So the numbers are there. They show what's going on. Just for wanting to know, like, in terms of what the ACC schools spend on their budget, Virginia had the highest athletic budget in the ACC last year. They were spending $161 million. That was the 14th largest athletic budget in the entire country. The Big 10, Big 12, and SEC own the top 10 spots. Ohio State, by the way, is number one in the country. Their athletic budget is $252 million a year. So you can kind of get an idea of what we're dealing with here. We are live right now on the Desmond Johnson Show. And of course, NFL free agency is going on right now. This is an all ACC edition of this with David Glenn, but as things are popping in and out, I'll let you guys know what's happening. Some breaking news that came in from our friend Sheena Quick online on Twitter, who covers the Carolina Panthers. Apparently the Carolina Panthers have just cut running back Miles Sanders in the past 10-15 minutes. Egg Roll Trav very excited about Miles Sanders finally getting cut. That tells me they might actually go for running back here in the draft. I was pushing Ashton Genty 2 months ago on Twitter and got ridiculed for it, DG. And now I'm on Twitter and people are like, should the Panthers go at Ashton Genty or such and such at number 8? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, really, what happened in the past month? We're the sitting crazy anymore. Cooper Flagg, going back to ACC basketball, Cooper Flagg named ACC Player of the Year and Rookie of the Year and All ACC First Team, which came out last night. Duke is number one in the AP poll for the first time since 2021. Coach K's final season, they spent a week at number one. As the ACC tournament kicks off here, starting today, and it'll run through Saturday. Dave Glenn, I'll ask you, you've watched all these teams this year. Duke with the most wins in the ACC in history, breaking the record set by North Carolina last year, who went 17-3. Duke goes 19-1 in this campaign this year. Would you take Duke or the field to win the ACC tournament this week?
I'd probably take the field, and that's no disrespect to Duke. I mean, it's a great question because it's kind of a 50-50 proposition, right? I mean, Duke, I'll tell you this. What Duke did in the details of that 19-1 record, their margin of victory, Des, was one of the most dominant in the history of the 72-year-old Atlantic Coast Conference. And for the record, 3 of the other 4 schools that had the most dominant regular seasons measured by margin of victory played in the NCAA tournament championship game in the year they dominated the league that way. So the 2005 Tar Heels, for example, were among the most dominant ACC teams ever, and they, of course, won the national championship. The 2001 Blue Devils were among the most dominant regular season champions ever in the ACC. They won the national championship. The 1999 Blue Devils were the most dominant ACC team ever in terms of margin of victory, just how badly they beat their opponents in conference play. They didn't win it all, but they did play in the national championship game.
Lost
so that's the company that this year's Blue Devils are keeping. The only reason it's nothing against this Duke team. If I were at the betting window and I could only pick one team, I would pick Duke. But I do think the Clemson Tigers are for real. I think, remember, they've never won. They're the only original member of the ACC that has never won the men's basketball tournament. They've only been to the championship game twice in 71 years, the Clemson Tigers.
They look like a Final Four team to me. Yeah, they're good.
Smart. They're inside, outside. They're a bunch of seniors. They're well coached under Brad Brownell. They're comfortable with that slow tempo that you sometimes need to knock off a heavyweight like a Duke, as they did at Little John Coliseum. A lot of NCAA tournament games turn into those half-court grinders. That's the way the Tigers prefer to play. You just, the teams that run a lot sometimes have a hard time adjusting to those grinder games. Clemson does it for a living. That's what they do. So, Louisville's never won the ACC title. So even though it's not as hyped an ACC tournament for obvious reasons, I think we have several fun factors to watch. Can Duke win it all again? They've won 13 of the last 25 ACC tournaments, Duke, including 1 out of 2 under John Shire. So it's not like they've missed a beat after the coaching change.
The Duke Invitational, right? Yeah.
Number 2 and number 3 have never won the ACC title. So if either Clemson or Louisville in that locker room, that's just one more thing to be motivated by.
Wait, say that again? You said the
Clemson and Louisville have never won
the 2 and the 3. Yeah, okay.
The 2 and the 3 seed. So you got the 1 seed with its own dynasty factor, and the Cooper Flag, maybe the national player of the year. He or Janai Broom of Auburn is going to win that award.
Yeah, it's a 2-man race.
And remember, only 3 freshmen ever have won the national player of the year. It was Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson. That's it. So Cooper Flag would be the 4th ever to pull that off as a college rookie. And then the last nugget for Charlotte, and I'll be there on press row. I'll wave on the TV screen for you. The Wake Carolina matchup, if it comes to that, right, is essentially a loser goes home. The loser of that game can give up its bubble hopes. Now, the winner, I don't think, is automatically guaranteed a bid. Lots of crazy stuff can happen leading up to Selection Sunday. But if you're on the bubble and you can't you can't win that, it's truly like an elimination game in more ways than one. So that'll be fun to watch because it's a relatively even matchup between the Deeks and the Heels. And then the winner would get Duke if it unfolds that way. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of fun factors, and there's other good teams there. But I appreciate what you said earlier. 3 out of 18, Des, and I might have mentioned this on a previous show. In the last 40 years, the ACC's baseline has been 1/3 of the league getting bids. Like in good years, more than half the league gets bids.
Right.
But even in their worst years, it was like 3 out of 9, 1/3, 4 out of 12, 1/3. The last 3 years, it was 5 out of 15. Exactly 1/3 of your membership made the big dance. Well, now that you're 18, 1/3 is 6, and there's no way they're getting to 6 this year. They might be stuck on 3. Maybe they'll end up at 4. But even 4 out of 18 would be the lowest participation rate for the ACC since this event expanded to the 64-team bracket, now 68, way back in 1985.
That is nuts to me. As a lifelong ACC fan growing up in it, I'm 47, so the ACC has always been the league for college basketball. Like we are, SEC's football. If you want a bunch of points, the Big 12 is going to give that to you. But if you want college basketball top to bottom, Raycom Sports quadruple header Saturday, Kenny Anderson taking on Kenny Smith, whatever. Like there's a guy on every team type ACC. That is gone. That is long gone. Like some nights I'll watch ACC games. I'm like, I don't know this roster. Like I don't even know these kids. Like they're all flipped from the year before. And I did see something in that Myron article that did catch my eye too, in terms of one of the other things that's affected the league, and we've talked about it a lot here on this show, is the drainage of the coaches. All the coaches. We just talked about Kevin Keatts getting fired. He just took his team to the Final Four last year and won the ACC tournament. Literally from Wednesday night, if I'm not mistaken. They started on Wednesday and had to win 5 straight and lost his job. Not really through fault of his own, just really through the school not providing him with enough to go compete and buy players and bring them in. Now there is some light on the horizon, recruiting side wise. 3 of the top 10 players in the country are coming here next year. Cameron Boozer to Duke, Caleb Wilson's going to UNC, and the number 8 prospect, Mikel Brown Jr. They're all in the top 10 for the 2025 class. They'll be in the conference next year. Pat Kelsey, who's young, just won Coach of the Year. He's going to take Louisville back to the tournament for the first time since 2019, which is nuts. Ja Lucas, who's the assistant head coach over at Duke, has already left to go take over the helm at Miami. So there's a lot of young talent that'll be doing that here in the ACC. But keep in mind, the ACC's also produced 9 of the past 36 Final Four teams. Like they've won 1/3 of the past national championships this decade. So it's not like it's desolate. And a lot of times what happens, like last year, they get a small amount of teams in, and half the Elite Eight ends up being the ACC or whatever ends up being, or the Final Four or whatnot. And kind of like, see, we told you. Like every year at the end of it, it's like we're still a good basketball league, but they don't believe that during the regular season.
Carolina were both in the Final Four 3 years ago.
Right, exactly. Like, yeah,
So,
Carolina had a 16-point lead at halftime of the national championship.
And keep in mind, this year could have a saving grace because Duke is one of the favorites to win it all.
Yeah.
Louisville and Clemson are potential Sweet 16 teams or beyond. And who knows, whether there will be a fourth team from the ACC. But you could have a weird year again where you get only a small number in, but those 3 or 4 do well. Because that certainly was the case in 2022 and 2024.
Yeah, and it's I mean, hell, State beat Duke in the Elite Eight to get to the Final Four.
Miami went to the Elite Eight in the Final Four twice since the pandemic.
So it's weird for me. It's like bizarre world when I'm sitting there looking at it. Like I can't sit here and fathom a world where the SEC is like king of college basketball and football. So we'll see what happens. And then of course my boys at Carolina. They were probably the second hottest team in the league behind Duke going into Saturday, that Duke-Carolina matchup, and they just kind of ran out of gas. Everything you wanted to have happen for Carolina happened. They got Cooper Flagg in foul trouble. RJ Davis got hot first half. They come out in the second half still hitting everything. Then they kind of forgot about RJ Davis, and then Cooper Flagg was like, hey, I'm still here, and kind of started doing some Cooper Flagg stuff, and Duke just kind of ran away. I didn't expect Carolina to beat Duke. If they did, I'd have been excited for it and happy for RJ on senior night. But the result was basically kind of roughly what I thought. If they see them again on Saturday night in Charlotte, it'd be in the ACC semifinals. It'd be Duke Carolina. It means that Carolina would have beaten Wake, like you mentioned earlier, which is not a quad 1 win. So that's not enough for Carolina to get into the tournament, even with another loss to Duke. It does feel like Carolina almost has to win the tournament. Now, if they beat Duke, that's probably going to be enough to slot them in. I agree with that. But to be extra sure, just win the whole thing, which means you beat Duke, and then you probably beat Louisville or Clemson in the ACC final. I didn't think that there was I thought Carolina would match up better with Louisville and Clemson if they saw them again. Now, the way they're playing, they kind of figure the rotations out, and guys are hitting threes that weren't hitting them before. Duke is a mountain that I'm not sure Carolina can overtake this year. Cooper Flagg is just too good, and the other pieces they have, they actually built a team out of the portal. Where they hadn't done that the first 2 years of Shire. They were still dependent on those freshmen and then a couple of grad students to kind of fill in the gaps. They didn't do that this past year, and it shows. They're not a soft team like we were calling them last year. They're very tough, very defensive-minded, one of the better defensive Duke teams I've seen in a long time. And Cooper Flagg, man, he just does everything, like everything. I'm going to leave it with this, with Cooper Flagg. Of course, he's the ACC Player of the Year and the Rookie of the Year. Where do you rank Cooper Flagg in terms of Duke? Like, because he's got a resume now after 1 year, and I keep seeing rumblings that he might come back for sophomore year, which to me would be foolish. Although I understand the sentiment of not wanting to play for Washington or Charlotte right now, but in terms of Cooper Flagg, where do you put him in the echelon of Duke all-time players? Because his resume suggests that he's doing stuff that none of the, like Leitner or Williamson or Grant Hill, they didn't even do some of this stuff that he's doing. So you got to give him his flowers. Where do you put him? Like, how do you rank him in terms of all-time greats? In
terms of accomplishments, remember, only Zion Williamson has been the National Player of the Year as a freshman, right? So if Cooper pulls that off, which he might, that's very rarefied air. I mentioned earlier, only Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson have won National Player of the Year as a freshman. Also, one thing that Cooper's in the process of doing that you almost never see, there's only one freshman in the history of college basketball that led his own team in points, rebounds, blocks, assists, and steals, all 5 categories. Cooper Flagg leads the Blue Devils as we speak in 4 categories by a lot, and is barely ahead of Common Malawach in blocked shots. So Ben Simmons of LSU years ago is the only other guy as a freshman who led his team in all 5 of those categories, and that just symbolizes the guy's versatility. I mean, Cooper Flagg was just named the ACC Player of the Year, deservedly so. I voted him Defensive Player of the Year as well. How many ACC Players of the Year do you also consider either the best or the second best defensive player in the entire league? That doesn't happen very often, and it certainly doesn't happen with freshmen hardly ever.
Yeah.
So he's in rarefied air. I mean, And one more quick thing, Des, whereas some younger players have dominated when college basketball is younger, right? The world changed with one and dones and dominating college basketball for a while. Cooper Flagg just turned 18 during the season.
Yep.
And I wrote about this at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. Most of the guys on the All-American team are 24, 23, and 22 years old. So his competition for first-team All-American is 6 years older than he is, 5 years older than he is, 4 years older than he is. And I just think it makes even more magnificent what he has accomplished, because this is not a young dude dominating at a young era in college basketball. This is a young dude, thanks to the COVID bonus year, thanks to, redshirting, thanks to immediately eligible transfers, et cetera. We got a whole bunch of 5th, 6th year seniors out there, and Cooper Flagg's dominating in that context, which to me makes it that much more impressive. But he's certainly among the best freshmen in the history of college basketball. Among Duke players, it's harder, obviously, because you're comparing him to some 3- and 4-year guys, and that's harder to make kind of an apples-to-apples type of comparison.
The first freshman I can think of ACC-wise in my lifetime that had this similar impact, not actually Cooper Flagg's had a bigger impact, but Kenny Anderson's the first name that I think of in terms of a freshman that just came in and was just like, ooh, like this is different. Like, I don't know what this is, but this is different. I like this. Him, of course, Zion. It's just crazy that he's able to do this. And there's been talent coming through Duke the past 40 years for him to do this stuff that no one has done before. Again, I wouldn't blame him if he didn't want to come out, but I'm under the impression that was the game plan. That's why he reclassified in the first place, so he could get to the NBA faster, to get to that second contract. We had Matt Alquiza from Sports Illustrated on with us every Wednesday, and that's what he was explaining. He wants to get to that second max contract, and to do that, you got to get started early. And I'm still got my fingers crossed that I hope the Hornets will stop winning games. That's all they just won the other night. And I know it's the bottom 3 all have flattened odds for this now. It's not just like the worst, but hey, Hornets, stop winning. Please bench LaMelo and let's get this together. We got like 20 games left. What are we doing? Why are we winning games? Cooper Flagg's right there. Let's go get him. And he would fit, DG. He would fit in that lineup in Charlotte like a hand in a glove. You put him at the stretch 4, surround him with Ball, Bridges, Miller, Mark Williams, who apparently I guess is going to still be here. That's your starting 5. That's your core 5 for the next like 6 years. And you can make some moves in the NBA Eastern Conference with that lineup. They're all under the age of 26, I believe. So let's see what happens. But before all that, Cooper Flagg's got some work to do. Again, the Duke Blue Devils are the number 1 team in the country for the first time since 2021. So it's been 3 years since they've been ranked number 1 in the country. And I saw a quote from John Shire, who's like, oh, great, we're ranked number 1 in the country in the week when it doesn't even matter because we're all going to the conference tournaments and it doesn't nothing, none of that matters to us right now. But can Duke win the ACC tournament, continue this stretch, and basically be the flag bearer for the ACC going forward? Or will there be some sort of upsets going on in Charlotte? There's some folks in Winston-Salem, some folks in Chapel Hill, and other spots hoping that their teams can kind of continue to be hot and eventually vanquish Duke, because they're probably going to see them before the whole thing is said and done. But we're going to get out of here. I know DG's got to get on the road. He's heading to Charlotte to cover this. You can follow him on the North Carolina Sports Network on YouTube throughout the week. I'm sure he'll have interviews and all kinds of good stuff there down in Charlotte. Continue to follow him for the coverage at David Glenn Show on X. We'll be back not tomorrow, actually. We'll be back Friday, end of the week wrap up, NFL free agency, NBA, and more. We will talk to you end of the week.